Welcome back. Last video we talked about energy, talked about how it's the basis of all physical creation, how it can't be destroyed. Ultimately, it just changes and shifts and takes on new forms. And these forms, as the energy is in a formation, convey information. And we talked about how we have different channels which pick up this information, be it the mind, the body, the spirit. We also talked about stages of involution and evolution, how this energy comes into form and what the process is for it to move through this form, why it would do so, and what the outcomes ultimately are. The raising of both its awareness and the species' awareness through the evolutionary stages once the involutionary stages are accomplished. What we're going to talk about now is a meta model that provides a connection between all of these things, all of our stories, and ultimately the stars as well. So it produces a complete as above, so below connection that we can use as a map as we begin to explore all of these ideas and begin to establish a very deep connection with this spiritual channel of information and allow it to convey its meaning and ultimately help us evolve as we move along this path. So let's talk a little bit about the cube. The cube is an ancient meditation tool. It comes from many different mystical traditions. I discovered it through Kabbalah, which is ancient Jewish mysticism. It tells you to imagine the ancient symbols or the letters of the language of Hebrew. Now, these letters came from ancient Sumerian and Akkadian symbols, and then earlier than that, because language came far before writing. And so writing became the ability for us to take the meaning that was stored within us that we were attempting to convey through word and lock it into an external image and begin to convey that. Cave paintings, a lot of these came from animal drawings, and so they were conveying ideas, and these ideas became the basic archetypical metaphors through which our language ultimately developed. Now, what you are meant to do with this meditation is you're meant to take these ancient symbols, and there were 22 of them. You're told to take these symbols and imagine them at certain locations in space. What do I mean by that? Well, you're supposed to take one symbol and imagine it west up. Another symbol would be east down. Another might be north center, and so on and so forth. By the end of it all, you have built this three-dimensional space that is shaped like a cube. And this cube, as you explore it, you see there's very distinct meanings all around it. You know, each face has very distinct purposes in what it's talking about. So it's really a fascinating exploration into metaphorical ideas, archetypical models, and the way that our psychology kind of develops, because what it helps us understand is it provides a four-dimensional understanding of our psyche. Not only do we have the specific faces, which are kind of two-dimensional, but we have this three-dimensional space of how it plays together. And we have this flow that we're supposed to take around it that shows how it develops over time. It's dynamic, how all of these specific things interplay. As I was exploring it deeper, what I realized is that as we take these symbols and we look at their meanings, we can begin to apply them to tarot. And then we can apply them to astrology, because each of these begin to build different levels of meaning and storage of these metaphorical devices that we've attempted to pass throughout time, which helps scaffold and build our individual and our collective conscious awareness. What's even more fascinating is when we look at the meanings of these metaphorical containers, the tarot and the astrology, these begin to take on narrative qualities. And so we can explore them much more than just a single meaning of a symbol or a single symbol, let's say a thorn or something. That can have a lot of different meanings to people. But as we begin to apply and map these different layers on top, we see that it gets more and more focused on what it's attempting to convey. As we look at these tarot and astrological meanings and where they're connected on the cube, we begin to understand that there is a storyline that's being told because you are told to follow the cube around a certain path. And as we look at that path, we realize that what it begins to unfold is exactly the same thing that our narratives and mythologies flow as. Our outlines for these stories that have become the source code of our psyche have this same following around the cube. And I thought it was fascinating. And then I began to map what they were saying in the tarot and symbols to our value system models. And I realized the process that shows in how individuals and groups develop is the same outline that our hero's journey follows and that our physical human development follows as well. So now we begin to have this larger understanding of what it is to be a human and how all of these things play out on different levels, but they follow very similar trajectories. I explored it further and I realized, wow, this is a three-dimensional physical space and I'm fascinated with the brain. What if I put this over my brain? Because I realized the specific meanings, they kind of had some connections with what I understood our brain function was. And in fact, that's what I discovered all of these areas reveal, is that when we put a brain inside of this cube or put the cube over our heads, what we've identified in the last 30 or so years our brain functions as is exactly what that tarot, astrology, and symbol is meaning when it's placed right over it. So when you are told to imagine, we'll say the strength card. When you're told to imagine it, you're told to imagine it on this left side right over here. And that is the left somatosensory area. And it is where you control all of your motor functions. It is where you literally involve your embodied strength. Another example would be to imagine Ein, which is an ancient letter. It means I. And you're told to imagine it at the back bottom of the cube or the west down location. And the ancient meaning of that, like I said, is look, no, shade. It's a symbol, is an eye. And that is your occipital lobe. And that's how you see with your eyes. The information comes in, it's picked up, and it goes right back there. Another example would be you're told to follow from the front to the back, right along the middle, right in the center of your brain. And what you cross there is you're traveling on the ancient symbol Mem. And what its symbol is water. And I realized that is metaphorically or abstractly saying the flow of memory. And in fact, that is our default mode network in our brain. And it flows right through the limbic system, right in the center of your brain. And in the center of the cube is the ancient symbol Bayet, which means container or map. And that is exactly what your limbic system does, is it holds all of the maps of the memory of the stream of consciousness of life that you've experienced. And this happens at 22 places all over. I'm not going to go all of them or into all of them right now. I just want to kind of give you an idea about it. So what this reveals is that the ancient symbols, which we began to convey meaning through, are directly connected and correlated to the emergent functions of the areas of our brain as they develop through the experiences that we're actually using the language to talk about and build upon. And that's ultimately how your brain functions. Is your brain, it doesn't build new areas for functionality. It metaphorically or abstractly maps ideas on top. And an example of that would be this left portion of your brain right here, the left temporal lobe. And what its function has to do with, it has a lot of mirror neurons. And so when we are watching something, when we're looking at something, those are firing. And it has a lot to do on the left side with grasping. And so when we understand that this ancient symbol over here is literally all of these symbols on the left-hand side have to do with grabbing, grasping, closing of the fist, of the hand, we realize that your brain is metaphorically mapping as you can grasp something literally in the physical world. A monkey would watch another one grab a banana. And so those neurons would be firing as it sees that happening without it ever actually doing it. It also mapped your ability to grasp something and understand something, because that is what our left temporal lobe does. And so what that tells us is that by using this model, by using this tool, as we begin to meditate, we're taking our brain state down out of a beta focused kind of, can be sometimes stressful. It's a higher vibrational brain state. We're taking it down to a more relaxed state. And what ends up happening is we can begin to impart or imprint ideas as we're meditating and thinking about them. Well, as we meditate on these symbols and their meanings, and it directly matches to our brain function, what it ends up doing is we are consciously beginning to engage with the underlying archetypical map and framework of our emergent genetics and biology, as it was unconsciously just naturally selecting ways to interact with the environment. Now we're using our consciousness to do that, because we don't have to, we're the only species on the planet that has the ability, we don't have to physically do something or come in contact with something for it to engage our perceptive and our neural circuitry. We have top-down thinking. We can think with our neocortex and begin to work with the system inside of the system. And we're the only species on the planet that can do that to the level that we do. And so by thinking, we can begin to actively and consciously interact with these networks and build them in a more coherent and structured way. See, when we're responding to the external environment and the reality outside of us, it is reactionary. And it can become very distorted because there's a lot of things going on. A lot of networks get fired and collapse together, and things can become very stormy. When we look at our brain, it literally has different spiralings in different directions in different frames. So it's kind of like when they're not in a coherent firing, it's like being in a storm in the physical environment. We have these, challenging patterns that are working. And so we can begin to bring them into a much more coherent way of interacting with ourselves internally and the environment through just thought. And that's what meditation provides us, is it provides us with a medium or a space where we are consciously engaging in thought and consciously creating, not having to react to the external world. And so the cube provides us with a meta model of how we can work with all the different facets of our consciousness, because it outlays not only meanings, metaphors, narratives, story, but it also provides a mapping of where all the levels of consciousness are. And the consciousness understandings that we have in our psychological models are only a piece of what this tool actually provides. Now, when I was looking at the cube, remember I said that we could take the symbols and the tarot and how tarot connects to astrology. What we're going to talk about in the next video is something that is extremely powerful and super important in our journey as we move forward to spiritually evolve. We have mapped all of this information not only in our hero's journey in our mythologies, but we have mapped it in the stars because I can take the different locations that these symbols are and their astrological connections, and I can directly connect them to portions of our sky and where we chose to put meaning into dots that are really meaningless. But when you think about it, they are the oldest manuscript known to mankind. They are the longest running communication tool. They do not change very much over a very long period of time. And so we literally connected the dots and put meaning up there in those little shapes. And those shapes tell a story that transcends and expands and goes way beyond what we can understand about ourselves by the narratives that we've lived up until this point. See, we've been on the hero's journey, and that was to help us evolve psychologically. That's what the value system models help support and provide information upon, is that our myths created a scaffold which helped consciousness continue to develop towards its physical ability to produce individualized self-awareness. But now what the stars provide is the next portion of the journey. It extends past the hero's journey and reveals that we have actually been on the healer's journey the whole time. The only reason that we participated in this first half is so that we could begin to unlock what the next stages of our evolution are. And that is what we'll talk about in the next video. We will connect how the stars reveal a much larger story and the participation and the purpose that you play, the role that's integral in you connecting with all of this, and why we must create the one unified human narrative story that will help us live into the next 12,000 years and participate with an extremely powerful and groundbreaking idea. The idea that we have already always been being worked on, not only by a bottom-up natural selective process, but also a top-down supernatural selective process that uses consciousness, narrative, language, and symbol to work with the emotional abilities of this biology so that the awareness can become involved, become focused, individualized, and use that emotion and those narratives to help it begin to move higher and higher and evolve in its spiritual understanding of both itself and the group, and help build and heal the species. And that's what we'll talk about in the next video.